The gunshot that killed Henry Galloway echoed through the Kansas prairie on a Tuesday morning in late April of 1874. And by Thursday, his widow Hannah was already receiving visitors who spoke in hushed tones about her uncertain future. She stood in the doorway of her modest ranch house just outside Leavenworth, her dark hair pulled back severe and proper, her green eyes dry because she had run out of tears somewhere between the burial and the reading of the sparse, well, that left her everything and nothing all at once. The ranch was hers, all 200 acres of it, along with 30 head of cattle, 2 horses, a barn that needed repairs, and debts that made her stomach turn sour every time she thought about them. Henry had been a dreamer, always talking about the fortune they would make, the empire they would build, but dreams did not pay creditors, and they certainly did not mend fences or birth calves or break horses for sale. The women from town brought casseroles and sympathy. The men brought warnings dressed up as concern. "A woman alone cannot possibly manage a spread like this," said Thomas Wardell, who owned the dry goods store and had extended Henry credit he now wanted repaid. "Perhaps you should consider selling, moving back east where you have family." But Hannah had no family back east, no family anywhere really, and she would be damned if she would give up the one thing Henry had left her just because it came with challenges. She was 24 years old, strong enough to work, smart enough to learn, and stubborn enough to try. The problem was time. Spring was the busiest season on a ranch, when calves were born and needed tending, when fences damaged by winter storms needed mending, when fields needed plowing if she hoped to grow hay for winter feed. Henry had planned to hire help this year, had talked about it over breakfast the morning before he died, the morning he rode out to check the north pasture and startled a rattlesnake that spooked his horse. The fall had broken his neck instantly, the doctor said, as if that should be some comfort. Hannah found no comfort in the quickness of it, only a sharp anger that he had left her so unprepared, followed immediately by guilt for feeling angry at a dead man she had loved. She was in the barn 3 days after the funeral, struggling to lift a saddle onto the roan mare, when she heard footsteps behind her. Her heart jumped because she was alone and vulnerable, and there were men who saw a widow as easy prey. But when she turned, she found a young man standing in the doorway with his hat in his hands and an uncertain expression on his sun-weathered face. He was tall and lean, probably no more than 22 or 23, with dark blonde hair that needed cutting and blue eyes that seemed too serious for someone so young. He wore dusty trail clothes and had a bedroll strapped to his back, the unmistakable look of a drifter, but something in his posture suggested he was not dangerous. "Madam, I heard in town you might need help with your ranch," he said, his voice quiet and respectful. "I am looking for work. I am good with cattle and horses, can mend fences, do carpentry. I do not drink, and I work hard." Hannah studied him, weighing need against caution. "What is your name?" "Eli Dawson, madam. Most people call me Eli." "Where are you from, Eli?" "Texas originally. Been working ranches up through Oklahoma and now into Kansas. My family had a small spread down near San Antonio before Comanche raids made it impossible to stay. That was 7 years back. 7 years of drifting, Hannah thought. 7 years of working other people's land. She understood that kind of rootlessness, though her own had come from different circumstances. She had met Henry in Missouri, where she had been working as a seamstress, and he had swept her off her feet with his grand plans and genuine kindness. 3 years of marriage had been good despite the hardships, and now she was alone with those hardships multiplied. "I cannot pay much," she said honestly. "My husband left debts. I can offer room and board in the bunkhouse and a small wage once I sell some cattle." "Room and board is enough for now, madam. I just need work." Something in his voice made her believe him, some quality of sincerity that reminded her of Henry before the dreams had made him reckless. She nodded slowly. "The bunkhouse needs cleaning. It has not been used in over a year. There is a stove in there, and I will bring you blankets and supplies for cooking, though you are welcome to take meals at the house. Work starts at dawn." "Yes, madam. Thank you, madam. My name is Hannah. Hannah Galloway. You can call me Mrs. Galloway." "Yes, Mrs. Galloway." He put his hat back on, adjusted his bedroll, and headed toward the small bunkhouse that stood 50 yards from the main house. Hannah watched him go, wondering if she had just made a wise decision or a foolish one, then decided it did not matter much either way. She needed help and he needed work, and everything else would sort itself out or it would not. That first week, Eli proved himself worth 10 times what she could not yet pay him. He rose before dawn and worked until dusk, mending the long stretches of fence along the eastern property line, helping birth a difficult calf that surely would have died without his skilled hands, fixing the barn door that had hung crooked for months. He spoke little, moved with quiet efficiency, and never once looked at Hannah with anything other than respectful politeness. She found herself relaxing around him, found herself actually sleeping through the night for the first time since Henry died, because she knew the work was being done and done well. On Sunday, she invited him to the house for a proper meal. It seemed wrong to make him cook his own food in the bunkhouse when she was preparing a roast chicken for herself. And besides, she found she was hungry for conversation, for another human voice that was not offering condolences or advice she had not requested. Eli hesitated at the invitation but accepted, showing up at the door freshly washed with his hair still damp and combed back from his face. He looked younger somehow without the dust and sweat of labor, and Hannah felt an unexpected flutter in her chest that she immediately suppressed. She was in mourning. Such feelings were inappropriate, unwelcome. They ate at the small kitchen table, and Hannah asked him about Texas, about his family, about the years of drifting. Eli answered her questions but did not elaborate, as if he was unused to people taking interest in his story. His parents had been killed in the Comanche raid, he said. He had been 15 and working in town that day, had come home to find the ranch burned and his family gone. An older brother had survived but moved to California shortly after, and they had lost touch over the years. Eli had worked various ranches since then, learning the trade, saving nothing because there seemed no point in saving for a future he could not imagine. "You ever think about having your own place again?" Hannah asked. Eli looked down at his plate. "Sometimes. But land costs money, and I have never been good at holding on to what I earn. Not because I am careless with it, but because there is always something needed, always someone who needs it more." "That sounds like Henry," Hannah said softly. "He would give away his last dollar to help someone, even when we could barely pay our own bills. You must miss him terribly." Hannah considered the question, appreciated that Eli had not made a statement but asked, leaving room for the complicated truth. "I do. But I am also angry at him, which makes me feel terrible. He was a good man but not a practical one, and now I am left trying to salvage something from his dreams." "Dreams are important, though," Eli said. "Without them, we are just surviving, not living. Right now, I would settle for surviving." Eli smiled then, a real smile that transformed his serious face into something warmer and younger. "You will do more than survive, Mrs. Galloway. I can tell you have steel in you." The compliment surprised her, pleased her more than it should have. She cleared her throat and changed the subject, asking about his plans for the week, the work that needed doing. They talked until the sun set and the kitchen grew dark, and when Eli finally stood to leave, Hannah felt a strange reluctance to see him go, as if the house would become too empty and quiet once he walked out the door. Spring turned toward summer and the work continued. The cattle were healthy, the fences secure, the barn repaired and solid. Hannah worked alongside Eli most days, learning the skills Henry had never thought to teach her because he had always assumed he would be there to handle such things. She learned to brand calves, to identify illness in cattle before it spread through the herd, to predict weather by the feel of the wind and the behavior of the horses. Eli was a patient teacher, never condescending, always willing to explain or demonstrate as many times as needed. They developed routines, rhythms of work and rest that felt natural and comfortable. Hannah cooked breakfast for both of them each morning, and they ate together while planning the day's tasks. Lunch was usually something simple taken in whatever part of the ranch they were working. Dinner was back at the house, a more substantial meal that Hannah found herself taking greater care with as the weeks passed. She told herself it was just practical, that a hard worker deserved good food, but she knew she was lying to herself. She was cooking for Eli because she wanted to please him, wanted to see his face relax into satisfaction when he tasted something particularly good. By mid-June, the debts were paid. Hannah sold 10 head of cattle at a fair price and used the money to settle accounts with Thomas Wardell and the other creditors who had been circling like vultures. The relief was immense, and for the first time since Henry's death, she felt like she could breathe fully. She could pay Eli now, could offer him real wages, but when she brought it up over dinner, he waved off the concern. "Room and board is enough," he said. "You need to keep that money for supplies, for getting through winter, for building something stable. You have to be paid, Eli. You work too hard to do it for nothing." "I am not doing it for nothing." He said it simply, looking directly at her, and Hannah felt her breath catch. There was something in his eyes, some warmth that went beyond employer and employee, beyond simple friendship. She looked away quickly, felt her cheeks flush, felt her heart beating too fast in her chest. "I should clean up the dishes," she said, standing abruptly, needing to move, needing to do something with her hands. Eli stood as well. "Let me help." They washed dishes side by side at the basin, their hands occasionally brushing in the soapy water, each touch sending a spark through Hannah that she tried desperately to ignore. It was too soon. Henry had been dead barely 2 months. What kind of woman developed feelings for another man so quickly? What kind of woman entertained thoughts of a future that included someone other than the husband she had buried? But the thoughts came anyway, unbidden and insistent. She thought about Eli's laugh when one of the barn cats did something particularly foolish. She thought about the careful way he handled newborn calves, the gentleness in his strong hands. She thought about sitting across from him at dinner, the easy conversation that flowed between them, the way he looked at her sometimes when he thought she was not watching. She thought about being alone, truly alone, and how Eli's presence had made the ranch feel less like a burden and more like a home. That night, lying in bed, Hannah let herself imagine what it would be like to love again, to build a life with someone who understood the land and the work, who shared her determination to make something lasting from the ashes of loss. She imagined Eli in this house not as a worker but as a partner, a husband, a father to children they might have. The thoughts should have felt disloyal but instead felt like hope, fragile and new and terrifying. July brought blazing heat and afternoon thunderstorms that rolled across the prairie with spectacular violence. Hannah and Eli spent long hours moving cattle to higher ground before storms hit, reinforcing the barn against high winds, harvesting the first cutting of hay from the fields. The work was exhausting but satisfying. Each task completed another step toward stability, toward a future that no longer seemed quite so uncertain. One evening, after a particularly brutal day of haying, they sat on the porch of the main house watching lightning flicker on the horizon. Hannah had brought out cold buttermilk and cornbread, and they ate in comfortable silence, too tired for much conversation. The air smelled like rain and hot grass, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called out in its eerie, wavering voice. "I have been thinking," Eli said after a while, "that maybe I should move on once the summer work is done. You have got the place in good shape now. You could probably manage with just seasonal help, save money." The words hit Hannah like a physical blow. She set down her cup carefully, not trusting her hands to stay steady. "Is that what you want, to move on?" "No." The word came out quickly, firmly. "No, it is not what I want at all, but I do not know if it is right for me to stay." "Why would it not be right?" Eli turned to look at her, and in the fading light his eyes were dark and serious. "Because I have feelings for you, Mrs. Galloway. Feelings that go beyond respect for an employer. And I know it is too soon. I know you are in mourning. I know I have no right to burden you with this, but I cannot keep pretending that I am here just for the work." Hannah's heart was racing now, her throat tight with emotions she had been suppressing for weeks. "How long have you felt this way?" "Since the first week, maybe since the first day." He laughed softly, a sound without humor. "I told myself I was being foolish, that you were grieving and vulnerable and I was taking advantage by staying. But the truth is I stayed because I could not bear to leave. I stayed because working beside you, eating meals with you, watching you become stronger and more confident every day, those things made me happier than I have been in 7 years of wandering." Hannah stood, moved to the porch railing, gripped it with both hands. Behind her, she heard Eli stand as well, heard the boards creak under his weight. "I have been having improper thoughts," she said quietly. "About you, about a future I have no right to imagine yet. Henry has been dead only 3 months, and I feel like the worst kind of woman for even considering moving on so quickly." "You are not the worst kind of woman." Eli's voice was close now, just behind her. "You are someone who loved and lost and has every right to love again when you are ready." "Am I ready? How can I possibly be ready?" She turned to face him, found him standing closer than she expected, close enough that she could see the flecks of gray in his blue eyes, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body after the long day in the sun. "Only you can answer that." Hannah looked up at him, at this young man who had appeared in her life at exactly the moment she needed him most, who had worked tirelessly without complaint, who had treated her with respect and kindness, and was now offering her something precious and frightening. She thought about Henry, about the love they had shared, about the life they had tried to build together. She thought about the future, about the long years stretching ahead, about whether she wanted to face them alone or with someone beside her who made her feel alive and hopeful. "I do not want you to leave," she said. "I want you to stay, not just for the work but for me. Because I have feelings for you too, Eli, feelings I have been afraid to acknowledge, Hannah." He said her name like a prayer, like a question, and she nodded because she could not speak anymore, could not form words around the emotion choking her throat. Eli reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face in his calloused hand. His touch was gentle, reverent, and when he leaned down to kiss her, she met him halfway, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that was both tentative and hungry, both question and answer. They pulled apart after a moment, both breathing hard, and Hannah felt tears on her cheeks, though she could not say if they were for Henry, or for this new beginning, or simply for the overwhelming rush of feeling alive again after months of numbness. Eli brushed the tears away with his thumb, kissed her forehead softly. "We will go slow," he said. "There is no rush. I am not going anywhere, promise me." "I promise." They did go slow, though it was difficult with the attraction burning bright between them. Eli continued sleeping in the bunkhouse, and their relationship in public remained proper and appropriate, employer and employee to any observer. But in private, in the moments stolen between work, they learned each other with growing tenderness and passion. They held hands walking back from the pastures in the evening. They kissed on the porch after dinner, long, deep kisses that left them both trembling. They talked late into the night about their pasts, their dreams, their fears and hopes. Hannah told Eli about growing up in an orphanage in St. Louis, about learning to sew to support herself, about meeting Henry and believing she had finally found a place to belong. Eli told her about his parents, about the guilt he still carried for surviving when they had not, about the rootless years of drifting and the bone-deep loneliness that had become so familiar he had almost stopped noticing it. "Until I came here," he said one night as they sat together on the porch step, her head on his shoulder. "Until you, now I cannot imagine going back to that life." "You will never have to," Hannah said fiercely. "This is your home now, for as long as you want it." "Forever then, I want it forever." August came with its fierce, dry heat, and Hannah knew she needed to make a decision about the future, about her life and Eli's place in it. The town already talked, she knew. Mrs. Henderson from the church had made pointed comments about the handsome young man working Hannah's ranch, and Thomas Wardell had mentioned with barely concealed disapproval that a widow ought to be more careful about appearances. Hannah did not particularly care what they thought, but she cared about Eli, about protecting his reputation and hers, about doing things properly. On a Sunday morning in mid-August, 4 months after Henry's death, Hannah put on her best dress and walked into town with Eli beside her. They went to church together, sat in a pew near the back, and weathered the stares and whispers with heads held high. After the service, Hannah approached Pastor Williams and asked if he would meet with them that afternoon. In the pastor's small office, with Eli sitting beside her holding her hand, Hannah laid out the situation with careful honesty. She and Eli wished to marry. She understood it was soon after her husband's death, perhaps scandalously soon by some standards, but she was a practical woman with a ranch to run and a life to live, and she knew her own heart. Eli had been a blessing and a gift, and she saw no reason to wait simply to satisfy social conventions that seemed arbitrary and cruel. Pastor Williams, to his credit, did not lecture or judge. He was an older man who had buried many husbands and wives, who understood that grief moved on its own schedule and that loneliness was a genuine hardship, not a moral failing. He asked them both serious questions about their intentions, their faith, their understanding of the commitment they were making. When he was satisfied with their answers, he agreed to marry them quietly in the church the following Saturday, with just 2 witnesses required by law. The wedding was nothing like Hannah's first, which had been a modest but festive affair with friends and flowers and a dinner afterward. This was simple, almost austere, just Hannah and Eli standing before the altar in the empty church with Mrs. Henderson and her husband serving as witnesses. Hannah wore a pale blue dress because wearing white seemed wrong for a second marriage, and Eli wore his cleanest clothes and boots he had polished until they shone. They spoke their vows quietly, earnestly, and when Pastor Williams pronounced them husband and wife, Eli kissed Hannah with such tender reverence that she felt tears slip down her cheeks. Afterward, they walked back to the ranch hand in hand, and for the first time Eli did not turn toward the bunkhouse but followed Hannah into the main house, into the bedroom that had been hers alone for 4 months. There was awkwardness at first, uncertainty about whether it was appropriate for Hannah to be intimate with a new husband in the bed she had shared with the old one. But Eli was patient and gentle, and Hannah found that the ghosts that haunted her were not as powerful as the living man in her arms. They made love slowly, learning each other's bodies, building new memories to replace old ones. And afterward, Hannah lay with her head on Eli's chest, listening to his heartbeat and feeling more at peace than she had in longer than she could remember. The months that followed were the happiest of Hannah's life. She and Eli worked the ranch as true partners, making decisions together, building on the foundation Henry had laid but doing it smarter and more carefully. They sold cattle strategically, saved money, and slowly expanded the herd. Eli proved to have a good head for business, and under his management, the ranch began to actually turn a profit. By winter, they had enough put aside to weather the cold months comfortably, with money left over to make improvements. Winter itself was a revelation to Hannah, who had never before had the luxury of truly enjoying the season. In previous years, winter had been a time of stress and penny pinching, of making supplies stretch and worrying about whether they would make it to spring. This year, with the work done and the preparations made, winter became almost restful. She and Eli spent long evenings by the fire, reading to each other from books borrowed from the small Leavenworth library, playing cards, making plans for spring. They made love frequently, with growing confidence and passion, and Hannah marveled at how different this was from her first marriage. She had loved Henry, but their intimacy had been somewhat fumbling and infrequent, both of them young and inexperienced. With Eli, there was a naturalness and intensity that left her breathless. In February, Hannah realized she was pregnant. The signs were unmistakable, and when she told Eli over breakfast one morning, his face transformed with such pure joy that she started crying. He came around the table and pulled her into his arms, holding her tight, whispering "thank you" and "I love you" against her hair. A baby had been something she and Henry had wanted but never achieved, one more dream left unrealized. Now it was happening, this new life growing inside her, this tangible symbol of her future with Eli. "Are you happy?" Eli asked, pulling back to look at her face, suddenly worried that perhaps she was not ready. "I am terrified and thrilled and so incredibly happy," Hannah said, laughing through tears. "Are you?" "I never thought I would have this," Eli said, his voice rough with emotion. "A wife, a home, a child. I thought I was meant to drift forever. You gave me everything I did not know I needed." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through spring and summer. Hannah continued working the ranch as long as she could, refusing to be treated as fragile, though Eli worried over her constantly and tried to take on the heavier tasks. They hired a young man from town for the busiest weeks of summer, someone to help with the haying and fence repairs, freeing Hannah to focus on the household and preparations for the baby. Eli converted one of the small rooms off the main bedroom into a nursery, building a cradle from oak wood and sanding it until it was smooth as silk. On a hot September afternoon in 1875, with the help of a midwife from town, Hannah gave birth to a healthy baby boy. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Eli, pacing frantically outside the bedroom door, feared he might lose both wife and child. But Hannah was strong, and when the midwife finally emerged to tell him he had a son, the relief nearly drove him to his knees. They named him Samuel, after Eli's father, and he was perfect, with Hannah's green eyes and a shock of dark hair. Eli held his son with shaking hands, overwhelmed by the fierce protective love that surged through him. He had been someone who owned nothing, who belonged nowhere, and now he had everything that mattered. The years that followed were full and good. The ranch continued to prosper, and with prosperity came respect. The town that had gossiped about the hasty remarriage eventually came to accept and even admire Hannah and Eli, seeing in them a partnership built on genuine love and mutual respect. They were known as fair dealers who kept their word, hard workers who helped neighbors in times of trouble. Samuel grew into a sturdy, curious child who loved the ranch and the animals, who followed his father everywhere on short, toddling legs. When he was 3, Hannah became pregnant again, and this time she gave birth to a daughter they named Grace. Then came another son, Daniel, born when Samuel was 6. The house that had once felt too empty now rang with children's voices, and the ranch that Hannah had nearly lost became a thriving family enterprise. Through it all, Hannah and Eli's love deepened and matured. The passion of their early relationship evolved into something steadier but no less intense, a bone-deep partnership that sustained them through difficulties and celebrated with them during triumphs. They still stole kisses in the barn, still made love with the door locked while the children played outside, still talked late into the night about their dreams and plans. One evening in the spring of 1882, 8 years after Eli had first walked into Hannah's barn asking for work, they sat together on the porch watching their children play in the yard. Samuel was helping Daniel learn to rope a fence post, while Grace alternated between offering advice and picking wildflowers. The sun was setting, painting the Kansas sky in shades of orange and pink, and the air smelled like the honeysuckle Hannah had planted along the porch rail. "Do you ever think about how different our lives would be if I had not stopped here?" Eli asked, his arm around Hannah's shoulders. "I try not to," Hannah said honestly. "It frightens me to think how close I came to losing everything, how close I came to never knowing you." "You would have survived," Eli said. "You are the strongest person I know." "Maybe I would have survived," Hannah agreed, "but I would not have lived, not really. You taught me the difference." Eli pressed a kiss to her temple. "You taught me that home is not a place, it is people. You and these children, you are my home. You are everything." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their children, watching the sun set over their land they had worked and built together, land they would pass on to their children and grandchildren. Hannah thought about Henry sometimes, remembered him with fondness and gratitude for the good years they had shared. But the pain of loss had long since faded, replaced by the rich fullness of the life she had built with Eli. "I love you," she said, leaning into her husband's warmth. "I love you too," Eli replied, "every day more than the day before." Samuel's voice called out for them to come see his roping technique, and they stood together, holding hands as they walked down the porch steps toward their children, toward the life they had created from grief and hope, from hard work and devotion. The future stretched before them, uncertain as all futures were, but Hannah faced it without fear because she knew whatever challenges came, they would face them together. They had survived loss and loneliness, had built something lasting from the ashes of tragedy, and they would continue building, continue loving, continue making a home together until their time on this earth was done. The years continued their steady march forward. By the time the 1890s arrived, the Dawson Ranch had become one of the most respected properties in the county. Samuel had grown into a capable young man of 16 who took his responsibilities seriously, often working alongside his father from dawn until dusk. Grace, at 13, had inherited her mother's fierce independence and her father's quiet confidence. And at 9, Daniel showed signs of being the dreamer of the family, always asking questions about how things worked and why. Hannah, now in her early 40s, had grown into the kind of woman she had once admired from a distance in her orphanage days, when the society ladies would come to inspect the children in their fine dresses and confident bearing. She ran the household and the business side of the ranch with equal competence, keeping the books, managing sales, negotiating prices with buyers who learned quickly not to underestimate her sharp mind. The scared young widow who had nearly lost everything was a distant memory, replaced by a woman who knew her own strength. Eli had aged well, his face lined now from years of sun and wind, his dark blonde hair threaded with silver. At 45, he still worked as hard as men half his age, but he had also learned to take time for rest, to appreciate moments of peace. He still looked at Hannah the way he had that first year, with a combination of love and wonder that made her feel cherished even after all this time. On a cool October evening in 1892, the entire family gathered for dinner, a ritual that Hannah insisted upon no matter how busy the day had been. The kitchen table had been expanded twice over the years to accommodate their growing family, and now it groaned under the weight of roasted chicken, fresh bread, vegetables from the garden, and apple pie made with fruit from the small orchard Eli had planted years ago. "Pa, Mr. Johansson said he might sell his southern acreage," Samuel said between bites. "Said if we were interested, he would give us first option before taking it to market." Eli glanced at Hannah, that silent communication that came from years of partnership. "What do you think?" Hannah considered, mentally reviewing their finances, their current workload, their capacity for expansion. "How much land and what is his asking price?" Samuel provided the details, and Hannah did rapid calculations in her head. "We could manage it if the fall cattle sale goes well. But we would need to hire at least one more permanent hand, maybe two." "Worth it, though," Eli said. "That land borders our western fence and the creek runs through it, would give us better water access for the herd. Then we should make an offer," Hannah decided. "A fair one, but not so high that we stretch ourselves too thin. We learned that lesson the hard way." Grace spoke up, her voice uncertain but determined. "Mother, I have been thinking about school. Miss Patterson said there is a women's college in Kansas City that accepts students from across the state. I was wondering if perhaps I might apply." The request surprised Hannah, though it should not have. Grace had always been intellectually curious, always reading everything she could get her hands on. But sending a daughter away to college was expensive and, in many circles, considered unnecessary or even inappropriate. "That is a significant decision," Hannah said carefully, not wanting to dismiss Grace's ambitions but also wanting her to understand the full implications. "Why college? What are you hoping to study? Teaching, maybe? Or I thought I might learn business, help run the ranch more formally." "You have taught me so much, but I want to learn more, want to see what else is out there in the world." Grace met her mother's eyes steadily. "I love the ranch, I do. But I also wonder what it would be like to have choices, to know I am here because I chose it, not just because I was born to it." Eli reached across the table to squeeze his daughter's hand. "That is a wise way to think about it. Your mother and I will discuss it, look at the finances, and see what might be possible. But know this, Grace, we are proud of you for wanting more, for wanting to learn and grow. That takes courage." Later that night, after the children had gone to bed and the dishes were washed and put away, Hannah and Eli talked in their bedroom about Grace's request. They sat together on the bed they had shared for 18 years, and Hannah leaned against Eli's shoulder with his arm around her. "Can we afford to send her?" Hannah asked. "If we are careful, yes. It would mean delaying some of the ranch improvements we had planned, but Grace's education is more important than a new barn." Eli paused, then added, "Does it bother you, the idea of her leaving?" "Yes and no," Hannah said honestly. "I want her to have opportunities I never had. I want her to know she can be anything, do anything. But I also remember what it was like to be young and alone in the world, and I worry about her. She will not be alone. She will have us always, and she will have the strength you gave her." Eli kissed the top of Hannah's head. "You are an extraordinary mother, do you know that? And an extraordinary woman. I am just doing what needs to be done, same as always. No, you are doing so much more than that. You are showing our daughter that women can own land and run businesses and make their own choices. You are showing our sons that women deserve respect and partnership. You have built something remarkable, Hannah. Not just this ranch, but this family." Hannah felt tears prick her eyes, the good kind, the kind that came from being deeply seen and appreciated. "We built it together, every bit of it. Together," Eli agreed. "Always together." They made love that night with the quiet intensity of long familiarity, knowing each other's bodies as well as they knew the land, able to bring each other to pleasure with practiced ease. Afterward, Hannah lay awake for a while, listening to Eli's breathing even out into sleep, feeling grateful for this life, this love, this second chance she had been given. The fall cattle sale did go well, well enough that they made an offer on the Johansson property, and after some negotiation, reached an agreement that worked for both parties. They hired 2 brothers from town, experienced ranch hands who were reliable and hardworking. With the additional help and the expanded grazing land, the ranch's productivity increased significantly. True to their word, Hannah and Eli began the process of applying for Grace's admission to the Women's College in Kansas City. The application required letters of recommendation, and Hannah wrote one herself, carefully documenting her daughter's intelligence, work ethic, and character. Pastor Williams, who had married Hannah and Eli all those years ago and had watched their family grow, wrote another. When the acceptance letter arrived the following spring, Grace cried with joy and Hannah cried with pride and worry mixed together. The summer before Grace left for college was bittersweet. Hannah tried to memorize every detail, knowing that her daughter would come back changed, would come back as someone moving toward adulthood and independence. They spent long hours together, Hannah teaching Grace advanced bookkeeping and sharing the hard-won wisdom of running a household and a business. Eli taught Grace to shoot better, insisting that a woman traveling to the city needed to know how to protect herself, even if she never needed to use the skill. On a warm August morning in 1893, the family loaded Grace's trunk onto the wagon for the trip to Leavenworth, where she would catch the train to Kansas City. Samuel and Daniel were subdued, already missing their sister. Eli drove the wagon with Hannah beside him, and Grace sat in the back, trying to be brave but looking terribly young. At the train station, they waited together on the platform, making small talk to cover the emotion. When the train finally steamed into view, Hannah pulled Grace into a fierce hug. "Remember who you are and where you come from. Remember that you are strong and capable, and remember that you can always come home. I know, Mother, I love you. I love you too, sweetheart, so much." Eli hugged Grace next, and Hannah heard him murmur something about being proud of her, about her being braver than he had ever been. Then Samuel and Daniel took their turns, both trying to act older than their years, both blinking back tears. The train pulled away with Grace waving from the window, and Hannah stood on the platform watching until it disappeared around the bend, taking her daughter off into the world. Eli's arm came around her shoulders, solid and comforting. "She will be fine," he said. "She is your daughter. She will be more than fine." Hannah nodded, not trusting her voice, and let Eli lead her back to the wagon. On the ride home, she allowed herself to cry, grieving the end of one stage of motherhood even as she felt proud of the young woman Grace was becoming. Life on the ranch continued, adapting to Grace's absence. Letters arrived regularly, full of details about her classes, her roommate, the exciting and sometimes overwhelming experience of city life. She came home for Christmas looking sophisticated and worldly, full of new ideas and opinions, and Hannah marveled at how much a person could change in just a few months. The following years brought more changes. Samuel, at 20, fell in love with a young woman from town, Ellen Porter, whose family ran the general store. She was kind and practical, with a good sense of humor and a genuine love for ranch life. When Samuel asked permission to propose, Eli gave his blessing enthusiastically, and Hannah planned a beautiful wedding for the spring of 1895. Watching her firstborn son speak his vows, Hannah thought about that terrifying time after Henry's death when she had been alone and overwhelmed, never imagining that someday she would stand in a church watching her son marry, continuing the cycle of life and love. Samuel and Ellen built a small house on the ranch property, and Samuel took on more responsibility for the day-to-day operations, allowing Eli to finally slow down a little. Not that Eli ever truly stopped working, but he learned to delegate, to trust his son's judgment, to take afternoons off occasionally to go fishing or simply sit on the porch with Hannah. Grace graduated from college in 1896, and the entire family made the trip to Kansas City for the ceremony. Watching Grace walk across the stage to receive her diploma, one of only 30 women in her class, Hannah felt a profound sense of accomplishment. Her daughter had choices now, opportunities, a future she could shape with her own hands. That was worth more than any amount of money or land. To everyone's surprise, Grace decided to return to Leavenworth, rather than stay in Kansas City or move somewhere else. "I want to teach," she announced at dinner the night after her graduation. "I want to start a school here, a good one that prepares both boys and girls for higher education. There is nothing like that in the county, and there should be." Within a year, Grace had established a small private academy in Leavenworth, teaching children of all ages. Her college education and city experience lent her credibility, and her natural teaching ability did the rest. The school thrived, and Grace thrived with it, becoming known as one of the most educated women in the county. Daniel, the dreamer of the family, decided at 17 that he wanted to study engineering. He was fascinated by the new technologies emerging at the turn of the century, by trains and bridges and machines. Eli and Hannah, having learned from Grace's experience that education was worth the investment, supported his ambitions. Daniel left for university in 1898, and Hannah grew accustomed to having her children scattered, to the way family evolved and changed. As the new century approached, Hannah and Eli were in their late 40s and early 50s, no longer young but not yet old, in that middle space where the past felt long and the future still held promise. They had achieved more than either of them had dared to dream during those early desperate days. The ranch was successful and stable, their children were thriving, and their love had endured through all the challenges and triumphs. On the last evening of 1899, they hosted a gathering at the ranch to celebrate the new year and the new century. Samuel and Ellen were there with their baby daughter, Hannah's first grandchild. Grace came with several of her teacher colleagues. Daniel was home from university on winter break, full of enthusiastic explanations about engineering projects that mostly went over everyone's heads. The house was full of people and laughter and life. At midnight, when the clock struck 12 and everyone cheered for the year 1900, Eli pulled Hannah onto the porch for a moment of relative quiet. The night was cold and clear, stars blazing overhead in the deep Kansas sky, and inside they could hear the celebration continuing. 26 years, Eli said softly, holding both of Hannah's hands. 26 years since I walked into your barn looking for work. Best decision I ever made hiring you, Hannah said with a smile. Best decision I ever made staying. Eli brought her hands to his lips, kissed them gently. "I love you, Hannah. I have loved you since the beginning, and I will love you until the end. You are my home, my heart, my everything." "And you are mine," Hannah said, her voice thick with emotion. "You gave me a life I never thought I could have. You gave me love and partnership and a family. You gave me hope when I had none. I love you, Eli, so very much." They kissed there in the cold, a long, deep kiss full of passion and tenderness and history, and when they finally pulled apart, Hannah felt complete in a way she had not known was possible in those dark days after Henry's death. She had survived loss and built something beautiful from the ashes. She had found love twice, had been brave enough to accept it when it appeared, had worked and sacrificed and dreamed until those dreams became reality. The years continued to pass, each one adding new layers to their story. Samuel and Ellen had 3 more children, giving Hannah and Eli a house full of grandchildren to spoil. Grace eventually married one of the town's lawyers, a bookish man who appreciated her intelligence and supported her teaching career. They had 2 children and a partnership that reminded Hannah of her own marriage. Daniel graduated with engineering honors and got a job with a railroad company, traveling throughout the West designing bridges and rail lines, but he always came home for Christmas. Hannah and Eli aged together gracefully, their hair going white, their bodies slowing but their minds sharp and their love undimmed. They handed over most of the ranch operations to Samuel, but remained involved, offering advice and wisdom gained from decades of experience. They spent more time together, taking long walks around the property, remembering all the work they had done, all the challenges they had overcome. On a warm spring afternoon in 1911, 37 years after they first met, Hannah and Eli sat on the porch watching their grandchildren play in the yard. The ranch house had been expanded and improved over the years, but the porch remained the same, the place where they had first confessed their feelings, where they had made countless decisions, where they had spent countless evenings simply being together. "You have any regrets?" Hannah asked suddenly. It was a question she had wondered about but never quite dared to voice. Eli had given up his wandering life for her, had stayed in one place when he might have seen the world. Eli turned to look at her, and in his blue eyes she saw nothing but contentment and love. "Not a single one. Every choice I made, every path I took led me here to you. How could I regret that? You could have had adventures, traveled, seen things. I had adventures right here. I watched our children grow, built something that will last beyond us, loved you with everything I had. That is the greatest adventure of all." He reached over and took her hand, intertwining their fingers. "My only wish is that we had more time. A lifetime with you will never feel like enough." Hannah squeezed his hand, feeling tears gather in her eyes. "Then we will have to make the most of every moment we have left." "Agreed." They sat in comfortable silence, hands clasped, watching the sun begin its descent toward the horizon. Inside the house, they could hear Ellen preparing dinner, could hear Samuel's voice calling instructions to one of the ranch hands. The sounds of life continuing, of the legacy they had built together. As the light turned golden and the shadows grew long, Hannah thought about how far she had come from that terrified widow who nearly lost everything. She thought about the courage it had taken to hire a stranger, to let herself love again, to build a new life from the ruins of the old. She thought about Eli, young and uncertain, appearing at exactly the right moment, staying for reasons that went beyond duty, building a life and a love that had endured for nearly 4 decades. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what? For staying. For loving me. For giving me this life." Eli lifted their joined hands and kissed her knuckles, a gesture he had performed thousands of times over the years but which still made her heart flutter. "Thank you for letting me stay, for loving me back, for giving me a home when I had been homeless for so long. We saved each other, Hannah." "That is what we did." She nodded, unable to speak past the emotion in her throat, and leaned her head on his shoulder. They sat that way until the dinner bell rang, until their grandchildren came running to pull them inside, until the moment passed into memory, one more treasured moment in a life full of them. The years rolled on, as years do, bringing both joys and sorrows. They lost Ellen to pneumonia in 1915, and Samuel grieved hard, though he found comfort in his children and in continuing to build the ranch his parents had saved. Grace's school became an institution, training multiple generations of children, and she was considered one of the most respected women in Leavenworth. Daniel's engineering career flourished, and he worked on some of the most important infrastructure projects in the western states. Hannah and Eli grew old together, their bodies failing in small increments, but their minds remaining sharp and their love as strong as ever. They celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary in 1915 with a party that filled the ranch house to bursting with children and grandchildren and friends and neighbors. Looking around at the crowd, at the life they had built, Hannah felt deeply satisfied. They had done well. They had taken broken pieces and created something whole and beautiful. In the winter of 1918, Eli caught a cold that turned into pneumonia. At 70 years old, his body did not have the strength to fight it off, and despite the doctor's best efforts, he grew weaker. Hannah sat by his bedside day and night, holding his hand, talking to him about their life together, telling him how much she loved him. "I am not afraid," Eli told her one evening, his voice weak but certain. "I have had a good life, a full life. You gave me that." "We gave it to each other," Hannah said, tears streaming down her face. "Please do not leave me yet. I am not ready. You are the strongest person I know. You will be fine. I do not want to be fine without you." Eli smiled, squeezed her hand with what little strength he had left. "You won't be without me. I will always be with you in everything we built, in our children, in every corner of this ranch. You carry me in your heart and I carry you in mine. Death cannot change that." He died peacefully 3 days later, surrounded by family, with Hannah holding his hand and whispering that she loved him, that she would always love him, that she would see him again someday. The funeral was large, the church packed with people whose lives Eli had touched over the years. He was buried on a hill overlooking the ranch, in a spot they had chosen together years before, where the view stretched out across the land they had worked and loved. Hannah grieved deeply, but she did not fall apart. She had survived loss before, had learned that life continued even when it felt impossible. She missed Eli with an ache that never fully went away, but she found comfort in their children, in their grandchildren, in the ranch that stood as a testament to everything they had built together. She lived another 6 years, staying active and involved in the ranch management, teaching her grandchildren the lessons Eli had taught her, making sure the story of their love and their partnership was passed down to the next generation. She spoke often of Eli, keeping his memory alive, and sometimes, sitting on the porch in the evening, she swore she could feel his presence beside her, could almost hear his voice on the wind. On a quiet morning in May of 1924, Hannah Galloway Dawson died peacefully in her sleep at the age of 74. Her children found her in her bed, her face peaceful, her hands stretched out as if reaching for someone. They buried her on the hill next to Eli, and the entire town came to pay respects to a woman who had lived with courage and dignity, who had turned tragedy into triumph, who had loved deeply and built well. The ranch continued for generations, passed down through Samuel's line, always remaining in the family. The story of Hannah and Eli became family legend, told and retold to each new generation, the tale of the widow who needed help and the young cowboy who stayed for reasons beyond duty, who found love in the midst of loss and built something that lasted long beyond their own lives. Their grave markers stood side by side on the hill, simple stones that bore their names and the dates of their lives, and beneath those dates, a single line that Samuel had chosen: "Together always." Because that was the truth of their story, the heart of their love. They had found each other when both were lost, had built a life together through hard work and dedication, and had proved that love, real love, could overcome any obstacle and endure beyond even death itself. The land they had worked still produced cattle and crops. The house they had lived in still stood strong. The children they had raised still carried their values and their stories. And somewhere in the Kansas wind that blew across those prairies, in the settling of dust and the call of birds in the endless sky, their love remained, as permanent and powerful as the land itself.